Good morning. I am Bill Rawlings, Chair of the California Workforce Pathways Joint Advisory Committee for 2021. I want to thank you for joining us today. Due to the pandemic, today's meeting is being conducted virtually, so I'm asking for everyone's patience as we navigate through today's meeting. Today's meeting is being broadcast through a live webcast. Interested parties can view the broadcast by visiting the California Workforce Pathways webpage and click on the live webcast link located under the 2021 Public Meeting Notices, Agendas, and Minutes. A recording of the webcast will be archived at the California Workforce Pathways webpage in about a week. I have the following announcements to make sure that we have a smooth meeting. First, keep all microphones on mute. Second, all attendance and motions will be taken by roll call. Committee members will use the raise hand feature in the live webcast to be recognized for providing a comment or a question. And fourth, I'll ask for public comment for each agenda item and again at the end of the meeting. Public comments can be made via a live webcast, email, or by phone, and all options are explained on the posted agenda. Today, we have a number of items to cover. And first, we will have a second study session led by Jobs for the Future on the development of the state CTE plan, which will be followed by an update on the CTE state initiatives, the CTE incentive grant, and the K-12 Strong Workforce Program. And then we'll conclude today's meeting with a conversation about data metrics. So we have to have a quorum to continue. So can we have staff call the roll?
Chair Rawlings.
Present.
Vice Chair Sun.
Present.
Member Grande.
Present.
Member McQuillan.
Here.
Member Rucker.
Here.
Ex officio Member McGuire. Ex officio Member Rattray. And Member Williams.
All right. It looks like we do have a quorum. And so we will have Tara please announce the staff that are in attendance and supporting us today.
Yes, today we have Sheni Weber, Vice Chancellor from the Workforce and Economic Development Division, as well as Ayana Iatrides, who is also Dean at the Workforce and Economic Development Division. We have Pete Callis, our Division Director of Career and College Transition Division, and Colby Franklin, Education Administrator for Career and College Transition Division.
All right. Thank you. So that takes us to item number one, approval of the California Workforce Pathways Joint Advisory Committee's September 29th, 2021 preliminary report of action, which are our draft minutes. So I'd like to seek approval. Is there a motion or any discussion?
Approval, Chair Rawlings.
All right. Moved by Member Grande. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Vice Chair Sun. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. So we have a motion and a second. Can we please call the roll?
Chair Rawlings.
Yes.
Vice Chair Sun.
Aye.
Member Grande.
Aye.
Member McQuillan.
Aye.
Member Rucker.
Aye.
Muted.
All right. I think that is our hold music going on here.
That's our arts, media, and entertainment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mood music.
Elevator music.
So we completed the roll call. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. So the approved report of action minutes for the September 29th, 2021 meeting and the recording of today's broadcast will be available on the California Workforce Pathways webpage. I don't know if we wanted to continue on to the next item or we wanted to try and tackle the hold.
Give us just a second so we can get this done.
There we go. So that gets us to item number 2. This is the second.
Unmuted.
There we go. This is the second of 2 study sessions on the California State Plan for Career Technical Education, led by Jobs for the Future staff. So I'd like to welcome Pete Callis, Director of the Career and College Transition Division, and Shani Weber, Vice Chancellor of Workforce and Economic Development Division for the California Community Colleges, to give us a brief update on the status of the state CTE plan.
Good morning, and thank you, Chair Rawlings. I'll kick this piece off. Just a recap of the last study session. We had Kim Green, the Executive Director of Advanced CTE, present at that session, and she gave us a national perspective on CTE and also discussed how to create equitable CTE programs and the need to adapt our CTE programs based on the effects of the pandemic. So how we're going to pivot and do that across the nation and in California. And then we had a state panel on cutting edge pathways development in the states of Delaware and Illinois. And so they gave us how they're developing their CTE state plan and how it's similar to California's state plan. Also some insight on how to braid funding strategies and how to align data and accountability systems in our CTE state plan. And then finally, they discussed the role of regional partnerships and how to develop governance models and effective structures across the state using these partnerships. And then finally, Charlotte Cahill from JFF discussed strategies and systems to support high quality and equitable work-based learning programs. So that's just a little recap on what we did at the last study session. I'd now like to pass it over to my colleague, Shani Weber.
Thank you, Director Callis. Good morning. I'm Shani Weber. I'm the Vice Chancellor for Workforce and Economic Development at the California Community College's Chancellor's Office. I apologize if my internet has been unstable this morning, so hopefully I don't get choppy or sound funny. Good morning, Chair Rollins, Vice Chair Sun, and members of the committee. We wanted to continue with our second study session with a very different approach and focus on the bigger picture. We heard you talk about wanting us, the emphasis on wanting to be bold, wanting to be forward-looking, and really pushing the innovation. And with the focus on very specific models and structures in September, today we're going to shift to that bigger picture perspective. And so we have 2 presentations for you today. Particularly, I just want to set a little bit of context. You're going to hear from MC Burning Glass, because they have a lot of very insightful data about the current economy, looking at industry and sectors very differently and focusing on economies with a lot of job growth that will lead us out of this pandemic recovery and also help us look at addressing equity. And beyond addressing job skills and driving the post-pandemic recovery, it's also about issues related to the future of work, where that's going, providing a very different look at traditional regions and sectors that we have been working on and how we've been organized in our system. Given that a lot of business models have changed, we've seen that, and the jobs have changed, and then the acceleration of digitization of jobs to what we're looking at and how we're normal. And so within this context, we're thinking of structures helping us think about what is the next 50 years with this huge shift in economy. And also, given this really critical inflection point that we're at, we see a huge convergence of a lot of things. There's a lot of big blending and interconnectedness that we see between many sectors, that also where education is involved. So we really intend for this study session to present that larger perspective to further inform our work on the state plan for CTE. So I hope you'll enjoy this presentation today. I'm looking forward to it. And I will now turn it over to, I believe, Charlotte Cahill to moderate this study session. Or is it Daniel? I don't see.
I think Daniel's up there.
Daniel, okay. I apologize. So over to you, Daniel.
Thanks, Sheni, and thank you to the committee for having us here today for this second of two study sessions. Just wanted to quickly introduce Joel Simon, Vice President of Workforce Strategies at MC Burning Glass. He is with us here today, as Sheni mentioned, to discuss some of his organization's latest labor market research and insights, as well as implications for the future of work, credentials, CTE development, and equity. So I will now turn it over to Simon.
Great. Thanks very much, Daniel. And thanks to the committee and the chair and vice chair and all the members for inviting MC Burning Glass to talk with you today. So as Daniel mentioned, my name is Joel Simon. I am proud to serve as Vice President for Workforce Strategies at MC Burning Glass in what we call our Community Insights Division. And that's working with folks like you in public workforce systems, community college districts, and education and workforce and economic development consortia at the local, regional, state, and national levels all across the U.S. If you go ahead and sort of flip to the next slide, I'll go ahead and share with you a little bit about who we are and what we are all about. So you may have heard of us or our predecessor companies, either MC or Burning Glass, recently merged just this past summer. And we work very hard to try and understand the labor market. And let me tell you, it's been a really interesting time to be in the labor market study, data and analysis and solutions business these last couple of years. We draw on a varied and we like to think sort of comprehensive and important set of data resources as we try and unlock some of the mysteries of what's going on in the labor market and more importantly, what we do about it to maximize opportunity for our citizens and grow prosperity and economic mobility within and across our communities. But certainly traditional labor market data, that which we derive from so reports and surveys and from various government sources are critically important, and we're very proud of the use and modeling of that. We also rely very heavily on job postings. So every day our robots go out and visit job postings websites, employer websites, aggregators, and job boards to try and find out exactly what are employers asking for today. And we roll that up across the country, indeed across the globe, and compare that with what we learned about them and what they were asking for yesterday, the day before, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, et cetera. At a level of granularity that's a bit more intense than what we can get from those traditional labor market data that I mentioned a moment ago. And then finally, resumes and social media profiles where individuals are able to say, hey, here's who I am, here's what I do, here's the credentials I've earned, here are the jobs I've held, here are the skills that I have. And so by taking all of these kinds of data together, we're able to come up with, I think, a pretty clear picture of what happens in the labor market. And of course, nothing substitutes for that human input. And we get that through interviews, focus groups, and other qualitative inputs. And on the slide that you see right now is just a small sampling of the folks that we work with and for, and who we deliver our data and insights and interpretations to. And we're of course proud to now include you all among that group of folks who we're happy to share this with. At a lower level, below the industries, below the occupations, below the sort of credentials, what's really also very important is very, very detailed information on skills. On the next slide, you see a bit about our skills library. And so from all of those sources that I mentioned a moment ago, we've developed a pretty comprehensive library of skills, more than 30,000 discrete and unique skills that we've pulled, and that when organized and assembled in different ways comprise occupations, jobs, roles, and indeed pathways. And so as we look at those skills libraries and we look at those job postings to see how those different kinds of skills are reassembling themselves, we try and keep a pretty good finger on the pulse of the labor market, and not just which jobs are up and down, but how those jobs are redefining themselves and how companies and communities and individuals are expressing those unique combinations of skills to represent, hey, here's what I do, here's what I hope to do, here's what I have done, and here's what we can do in this really interesting and dynamic labor market that we've got. And so when we were talking about this presentation and thinking about, okay, where are we headed here? What are we learning from this very volatile time that we've been experiencing these last year and a half, 2 years? How do we get these insights from that very intense period to try and look further into the future and skate to where the puck is going to be? And so I'm going to share with you some of the things that we've been tracking and that we've been thinking about, and what the data is beginning to tell us about where this economy and where this job market is going. So a couple of themes have been really dominant over the last couple of years that we're using as a lens through which to look at the labor market and with which we can understand sort of what's happening. And first one is what I'm calling the 21st century infrastructure. And of course, we've been hearing a lot about infrastructure from a legislative and funding standpoint lately, and that includes traditional infrastructure, roads, bridges, airports, ports, things like that. And prominent in that classic sort of 21st century instance, we're of course talking about broadband and digital communications, the way that we're able to communicate right now across a state as large as California. And I'm in Chicago, JFF colleagues and friends are in Boston and elsewhere. We wouldn't be able to be doing that without this digital infrastructure, and recognizing some permanent changes that we're going to expect to happen in the labor market, where more and more folks are going to be using these kinds of technologies, and through infrastructure investments, these technologies being able to reach more and more people in a lot of rural areas, but actually also a surprisingly large number of folks in urban and suburban areas who also sort of lack digital access. So when that infrastructure shift happens, we anticipate that that's going to unlock a whole new sort of set of opportunities and questions and challenges as well. So the next feature, of course, that we're hearing about a lot as well is this idea of supply chains, and the question about whether off your coast of Long Beach, where your goods are sitting on ships waiting for their sort of spot in the port to be able to unload and get through California out to the rest of the country. I'm thinking about sort of different ways that we can arrange the flow of goods and services that maybe aren't as susceptible to interruptions like the ones that we've been experiencing. In particular, early in the pandemic, thinking about the availability of medical equipment, medical devices, personal protective equipment, and so forth, but also just your sort of regular products, whether they're fruits and vegetables shipped in from California to me in the Midwest, or items from overseas, from Asia, Europe, Latin America, what have you. Rethinking, how we imagine those supply lines working, how the human power is used to be able to arrange, manage, and facilitate and secure those supply lines, and to be able to access the things that we need. The next trend, that we're thinking about, and it's already been mentioned today, of course, is automation. And this is not at all new to the pandemic, to the COVID era, but certainly, when we see recessions, historically, we've seen accelerated investments in automation and accelerating use of automation technology to be able to move the economy forward. And that as economic recovery occurs, we don't necessarily just go back to the way we were, but advancing technologically forward through all sorts of sort of business processes, everything from robotic and touchscreen fast food kiosks to sort of retail and assembly kind of environments, and all the human power and brain power that's needed to enhance sort of processes, to make sure the autonomous systems are safe and secure, and to be able to have those technologies work alongside of those human beings who necessarily have their roles and their capabilities and their skills changed by virtue of these new technologies that change the way they work. And so in thinking about sort of the humanity of it, and thinking about how some roles, of course, can't be automated, right? We all, of course, around this virtual table are lucky to continue to add value to our employers and to our communities and to the state and to the economy. There's a lot of human power, that goes into that. But I think we are all learning new ways to express that human capability. And to be able to leverage those skills that are unique to human beings, but in, again, this vastly changed environment. So how we collaborate, how we express empathy, how we provide customer service in new digital formats and through and across the country and our states and communities. The most human of skills are the ones, of course, that can't be automated, but how we express those skills through automation technology will help us make the most of those. And so those are some of the themes that we have been watching really since the very early days in March of 2020, as we're trying to understand both the signal, but also to sort out the noise of the labor market. And this slide that you're looking at right now, of course, represents a great deal of noise and volatility. And this isn't even broken down into component parts. What you see here are job posting trend lines indexed to the early part of 2019, right? So you see all of those lines converge, at 2019, and how 2019, 2020, and 2021 have behaved differently from a demand standpoint over the course of the last couple of years. Of course, the largest portion of that being the COVID era and our undulating sort of recovery, our changes in policy associated with physical proximity and social distancing and mask mandates and everything like that, as well as the advent of treatments and vaccines and so forth. And so you can see that 2019 line is the blue line that's sort of in the middle. So we'll call that the old normal, right? Before we really knew what the pandemic was. And that yellow line with that little yellow sort of burst in that March period, which is when we recognized that we were in the early part of a pandemic, and how that yellow line has really gone a little bit crazy, going down and then up and then down again, and going jaggedly along for the remainder of last year. And then, of course, the 2021 line, as things have opened up more, and as we've gotten greater confidence by using masks and by getting vaccines and boosters. My sore arm will attest to the fact that the boosters are indeed here. And that green 2021 line, of course, being sort of significantly higher in the volume of postings, both to make up for that dip that we see in the yellow line, but also growth on top of that, as the most recent jobs reports from the Labor Department have started to tell us. So all that to say, it's been a pretty interesting and volatile time. And we're trying to look through those lenses that I mentioned a moment ago at what's happening in the labor market to try and think about what kind of investments we want to make, what kind of guidance we want to provide, what kind of programs we want to offer in order to understand these new realities and to make the most of them. And so these forces, as we sort of take those themes and seeing how they're playing out, we're looking at those changes in the job market, and these are some of the forces that are at play that we think we need to address in order to make the most of the skills and talent that we have to be able to fill the opportunities that exist in our communities. So we mentioned automation. We talked about skills, right, and thinking about how skills are indeed rearranging themselves in new ways, how we're communicating opportunity, not just the opportunity that employers are generating in terms of job openings, but how those in turn signal the skills requirements, how those translate to credentials, and then how folks in your orbit, the community colleges and the associated programs, can address both the skills and the credentials that are associated with all of those opportunities. At each one of those handoffs, there is an opportunity for miscommunication or signal failure, and sadly, all too often, that indeed is happening. And so how do we tighten up that signal? And how do we work with the job market to make sure that what we're teaching matters, right? And the skills that we're imparting in our programs are indeed able to be put to good use in the labor market, how they're wrapped up in something called a credential that is recognized and recognizable by both the folks that are earning them and the folks who are making hiring or selection decisions, based on those, and making sure that we're all speaking the same language when we're sort of making those references. So these are all some of the sort of the notions that we're trying to address and tighten up and apply our data to be able to unpack. And so what I'm going to share with you now are reports or bits of a report that we did about a year ago that we called After the Storm. And it seems a little silly now, of course, because the storm, hasn't totally wrung its way out. There's still some rain falling here. But this idea of after the storm, of thinking not just about industries and occupations and credentials, but those building on the themes that I sort of mentioned earlier, and what will characterize the economy going forward. And so we've identified these 5 economies, and these aren't regional economies or state economies, but these are thematic economies, right? And so as we reflect back on the last couple of years, these are some of the things that we're thinking about. So we're thinking about readiness, right? So when disruptions occur, whether it's in supply chains or healthcare services or communications technology, whether it's a natural disaster, whether it's an unnatural disaster, or something like that disrupts us next time, how do we sort of build in that readiness through infrastructure redundancies and communications technologies and financial security, and so forth. So that readiness theme, if anybody was not concerned about it pre-COVID, hopefully we've woken up to the fact that maybe we weren't so ready last time around, and so call it a wake-up moment to enhance our readiness for whatever comes next. We've talked about the remote economy. Interestingly enough, in our own company merger that just occurred, both parent companies were largely face-to-face companies. Most of the people showed up at an office every day, and even without the remote experience that we had, the merger of the 2 companies and recognizing now all of a sudden we have colleagues across the country and we're not going to make them move. What had been, dare I say, relatively conservative approaches to remote work got upended immediately. I will say, as a remote employee that began working remotely 6 months pre-COVID, it was tough, right? And it was especially tough looking at a screen and seeing a room with 8 people around a table, and I was the one guy, out in the hinterlands. And actually, the COVID experience, when everybody else went remote, was actually a boon to me. It leveled the playing field, and a lot of that we are working to retain as we work across the country, but also offer the flexibility that employees are now demanding because they've experienced it and it's improved their lives, but also that they deserve because they've proven that they can remain effective and efficient and productive even in this disrupted arena. Logistics, like I said, we've been thinking about that a lot, and we're all concerned about our holiday shopping and whether we're going to get the stuff off the boats through the ports and into the shelves, and so that rethinking that way, that lubricant of commerce and services and so forth, and how we help that lubricant smooth out some of the rest of those experiences that have been so disrupted. Jobs automation that we've talked about, and then, of course, what we're calling the green economy, and thinking not only about our energy grid and our transportation systems and our home building and so forth, but an increasing awareness of what's happening in the natural world and storms and droughts and floods and mudslides and so forth, and how that gets woven not as a separate sort of part of the economy, but woven into pretty much everything else that we're doing. And so these are some of the themes that we're thinking about. And as we look at how those themes are actually playing out in the job market, the next slide will show you some of the numbers that we uncovered when we did this report at the end of 2020, and how each of those economies represent pretty staggering levels, of demand and occupations associated, sort of specifically with those moves, whether it's readiness, logistics, green, remote, or automation. Very large numbers of workers making up really important sort of proportions of what comprises the workforce right now, but an even larger portion of what companies are asking for across that job posting universe that we are tracking every day. At a wage that's not insubstantial, and at a growth rate that was pretty strong pre-COVID, and then even in the doldrums of 2020 was rolled up, was showing net growth when so much of the economy was not. So these are the areas where needs are spiking even amidst the negativity that was happening last year. And then as recovery occurs, that is even further amplified. And so as we look to the future, the next slide, shows you some projections about where we think this might be going, right? And so in that baseline scenario, it rolls up to close to 20 million jobs that we're thinking about over that next 5 years. And so again, that's just sort of the baseline scenario. And if we think about sort of more aggressive growth opportunities or growth possibilities, even more outsized levels of demand and levels of opportunity across those multiple economies. Something really to be concerned about as the demographic shifts occur, as the boomer cohort of the workforce begins working less and less and ultimately leaving the workforce, and whether the millennials and everybody else are able to replace all of that capability, brain power, and skill that is walking out the door over the course of the next 10 or 15 years as that demographic bubble moves through. And so the next slide is a little bit hard to see on your screen, but I'll refer you to the report for another look. This is just sort of a view of where we see in which industries these kinds of new economy skills needs are shaking out. So that big blue bar is in logistics and supply chain. That's where a lot of the headcount is, and so the higher volumes of folks needed in that sort of logistics economy, but also in healthcare and manufacturing and information tech and ed tech, all of those sectors that you can sort of take a look at, having different sort of levels of impact on demand and opportunity there. And so as we think about sort of what to do with it, I'm going to refer to another sort of report. And so we've been thinking a lot about career and technical education, which I imagine is pretty important to a lot of the folks on this call. And so I'm going to refer back to some studying that we did about career and technical education programming at both the secondary and the post-secondary level in partnership with Credentials Matter. And so I'll refer you there to credentialsmatter.org. And on the next slide, you can take a look at a screenshot from there where we look state by state at the data that is available on throughput in the career and technical education system, again, at both the secondary and post-secondary level. And for better or for worse, we found that the secondary sort of reporting system was much more thorough than what we were able to find, in the post-secondary system, and in particular, just sort of state-level roll-ups. And on the next slide, we show you one of our big heartaches, our big areas of heartburn, was the fact that just not everybody is collecting data, and certainly they're not collecting it in the same sort of way. So it's hard to roll up to any sort of broader truths. And we were only able to get post-secondary CTE attainment data from those 4 states. Sadly, California not among them, but of course, California is its own unique and glorious place that is actually many, many, many states. So I might forgive California for not having arms around this sooner than I might have some smaller states. But on the next slide, we'll take a look at some of the things that we sort of did uncover as we think about post-secondary, in this case, post-secondary credentials, and what are the sort of nature of them vis-a-vis licensure, certification, vendor neutral or vendor specific software, career readiness, and other kinds of sort of credentials, and thinking about those signals. So again, trying to solve the signaling problem where an individual can have that credential, that piece of paper or that designation that says, yes, I do indeed have these skills. And on the right, you'll take a look, you'll see the specific credentials in the high volume ones compared to what we're tracking demand-wise. And so while we're heartened to see that the higher, the more frequently requested or required credentials are indeed at the top of the list of those being issued and being earned, falling in many cases short of the overall demand. And so we do indeed have a gap to fill there. And so I guess since I get to have an audience with you today, on the next slide, we'll share with you some of the challenges and call it a sort of request for how states can help us to get our arms around what's actually happening on that supply side so we can match it up with the demand side. So making sure that we're using uniform systems, that we are indeed collecting comprehensive data, and that we're able to sort of match it across systems to get those big roll-ups. I'm going to go ahead. I know we're running short-ish on time, and so I'm going to sort of roll down to the next slide. And again, that's that sort of signaling, and then thinking about that sort of subject area sort of differentiators. And on the next chart, you will see the impacts, right? And so this isn't credential related, but this is sort of major related. And so we're thinking about post-secondary, majors and underemployment and overemployment. And this is sort of a look at when folks are making their decisions about what their majors are, their ultimate outcomes may or may not result in good employment, and is too often the case. The folks who come out with the majors on the bottom 2/3 of this list end up being underemployed, or more underemployed in those majors compared to the ones at the top of the list. And so helping to match up not only the course of study, but also the credentials, and so how one's majors enable them to have a greater or lesser chance of becoming employed at the level that makes sense for their lifestyle and their family, and so forth. And the final thing I'd like to share with you, also recognizing that there is really an important equity sort of component to all of this. So all that we've talked about so far has been equity neutral, right? We've talked about jobs, we've talked about industries, we've talked about changing in the economy, but let's not at all kid ourselves for a second into thinking that those changes are applied uniformly across the various sub-communities that we have in this country or across California or in any geography, city, state, county, that we're working in. And this slide is just sort of a look at what we call the current workforce, the emerging workforce, and the aging workforce, right? And how the population sort of shakes out by race and ethnicity. And you probably won't be surprised to know or to recognize once again that our emerging workforce is far more diverse than our past, than the workforce that we are thanking for their years of service as they think about retirement and onto other things. And that if our outcomes don't also sort of reflect that diversity, that's not only sad, it's not only disappointing, but it's also a detriment to our economy. And it's also a detriment to all of our economic prosperity, regardless of whether or not we're a member of an underrepresented group or not. We need all that talent to come off the bench immediately, and we need to help them come off the bench to be able to express the full benefit of their capabilities, and so we can take advantage of their skills. And if we can't figure out how to do that for underrepresented groups, then we will all be poorer for it, in addition to experiencing a moral failing. And so one of the ways that we're using our skills library is to think about mobility, right? And to think about skills adjacency, and in particular, how skills from one occupation applies in another occupation, and how to overlay that sort of pipeline, that pathway information with wage information, with demand information, and with demographic information. And so if we're thinking about our logistics economy, right, one of the economies that I mentioned a few moments ago, here's just sort of your a basic sort of pathway. As for a shipping clerk, right, shares skills with an inventory specialist. Not the same set of skills, but some of your skills that you learn as a shipping clerk helps you to become an inventory specialist. And then if you go and pick up inventory management, bills of lading, and Excel skills, you can indeed get promoted into that inventory specialist, and it's about a $5,000 raise. And if that inventory specialist, who right now is only 31% people of color, endeavors to become more diverse and to be able to include more people of color, in that group, hey, it makes sense to look to the shipping clerks, because that's a more diverse group, more representative there. So your ability to find people there who can help you with the diversity, who already have some of the skills, and who would benefit to the tune of $5,000 a year by making that shift, checks all the boxes, right? So again, applying the similar skills adjacency kind of approach, the inventory specialist shares skills with the operations coordinator. It's another $5,000 raise, and that is another opportunity to increase the diversity of the operations coordinator role, which is only 23% people of color, measurably less than both the inventory specialist and the shipping clerk. And the difference is, how do we add those key skills of worker management, planning analysis, and project management? So thinking about that skills adjacency, I think specifically for community colleges who are, number one, well-positioned to be nimble and responsive to the needs and the demands of these kinds of occupations, who have the ability to serve a shipping clerk, who may go to work, at off hours, or have other sort of barriers that a traditional student might face. Community college's ability to reach that adult working and non-traditional learner, and to be able to target specifically those key skills, and not spend a whole lot of time teaching the inventory, teaching the shipping clerk all the things that they already know in order to become an inventory specialist, but just to zoom in on those skills to add. So as we think about skills adjacency, we think about this logistics economy, we think about the equity imperative, we think about the need for economic mobility, and we think about the need for equity and diversity as we go up that pay scale. These are all ways to leverage that skills through line and the big data that allows us to make the decisions about who we're reaching, why we're encouraging them to make the advancement, and what we're teaching them. So they can indeed move up. The next slide is just another rendering of the same concept. So again, thinking about the readiness economy and the remote economy. So we're thinking about the broadband infrastructure that we talked about a moment ago. We're here focusing now on the broadband satellite technician. Based on some models, there's a sense that we're going to need 26,000 of these folks, and they make in the mid-50s. Pre-pandemic, it was not a growth occupation, but with that infusion of cash, it will likely, at least in the near and medium term, sort of become one. It's very much a white male occupation, but most of those jobs don't require a college degree, and most of those jobs don't require lots of experience, but rather more of a short-term kind of credential. And so we don't have enough dislocated workers, right? So if we got all 14,000 dislocated satellite technicians off the bench, we're still going to fall short of that $26,000 need that we're estimating. So where do we look for them? Well, we look for workers who have some of the skills, who get paid less, and who represent greater shares of diversity and better representation of non-white folks. And so you can see insulation workers, television, satellite TV installers, and even telemarketers have some skills overlap. Not necessarily ones that are obvious or on the traditional pathway towards that broadband satellite tech, but these roles are all sort of folks who are available, folks who would be incented by a pay raise to go in there, and who are ready by virtue of their skills overlap. And on the next slide, we look at not only the skills gap as it relates to each of those workers that I mentioned, or not only the skills overlap, but also the skills gap, giving the community colleges and others some detail that they need in order to create programming and instruction that is most efficient and most affordable and least time consuming for the participants, so we can get more of those folks through out of those more entry-level roles into, in this case, the satellite and broadband technician. So these are all ways that we are trying to use some of these skills data as well as demographic data and tracking where we think these economies are going. And so with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions or engage in any discussion or hear from you about ways that any of these sort of concepts are already at play at your institutions or in your communities. So with that, I thank the committee and I thank JFF for having me.
All right. Thank you for that. A lot of great information. I don't know, Daniel, did you have anything you want to follow up on that, or can we go straight into discussion with us?
Discussion works, Chair Rawlings. Thank you.
All right, thanks. So I did have one. I'll lead off on this, and then I see Member Rucker next. There was a slide that you skipped through, and we've got a little bit of time, and it's the credentials matter opportunities for CTE.
Yes.
And I saw a couple points in there that had really caught my attention as I was going through the deck. And, strengthening access to data quality, making sure that we're expanding access to equitable, high-value career pathways. I was wondering if you could go into that a little bit.
Sure. Well, so number one is, the objective on that report was to say, hey, what is the CTE universe out there? And this was actually a follow-on report to one we did a couple of years ago. The first one just looked at secondary, right? And so what kinds of credentials are folks earning in what was then those secondary high school CTE programs, but then expanding that out to the sort of the post-secondary space. Number one is, the true answer is we don't really know because the data is not so great, right? And so we went state by state to try and say, hey, state secondary system, state post-secondary system, who's earning what credentials? And let's just say different states had different levels of ability to report that information. To the degree that we were able to get the information that we did, we then held that up against demand. So looking into those job postings to say, okay, so if these are what high school and college students are earning, do those credentials give them a leg up in the labor market? And in many cases, we find that there were a lot of credentials that just weren't mentioned by employers at all. Now, does that mean they're no good? No, not necessarily, right? And so you might have noticed in there CPR certification, right? There's very few occupations that are going to hire you just by virtue of having that certification, but it may be sort of necessary for some and very helpful sort of for others. There's some sort of, call them table stakes, right? Basic computer usage, Microsoft Office stuff, right? That kind of stuff. You might not see that so much in a job posting because it's assumed that folks are going to have that. So having those skills is very good. And so earning that certification may be more important in the attainment of skills than in the signaling, right? So in different instances, that's going to matter a little bit differently. But the ones that I really get concerned about are the certifications for which there is no demonstrable demand. And in that case, we may be keeping some certification providers in business, and we may be giving students a clear goal, which in and of itself is not a bad thing. But if they're going to do that, and if they're going to get a medal to pin on their chest or a certificate to hang on their wall, we would love for it to be something that says to employers, see, look, this is what we have to offer you in a way that we know that you recognize and we know that you need.
That's great. I'm looking forward to us building out our data system more. It's something that has been talked about for a while. So hopefully,
and to be sure, it's no small thing, right? You've got secondary systems, you've got post-secondary systems, you've got workforce investment systems, you've got commercial training providers. It's a pretty sort of enormous and chaotic ecosystem to organize. But there's no time like the present.
That's right. Very good. Let's go to Member Rucker.
Thank you very much, Chair Rawlings. First of all, let me begin by apologizing and saying I recognize that I have some audio issues, so if my audio feed fades in and out, I do apologize for that. And so I listened to this presentation with great fascination. There's a slide I'd like to ask you to put up again. You showed the 5 areas where the 5 Job Corps areas that are going to sustain and help rebuild the economy. Could you put that up again?
Yes, I think that slide in my deck. It's slide 13. We're managing them. I'm not flipping the slides. So yeah, if we go back to slide 13.
And so as we scan for that one in your slideshow, the reason why I wanted to take a look at this again, one of the things, there it is. Yep. One of the things that you spoke about, and this is an assertion you just made again in response to Chair Rawlings' question, is you talked about in the preparation programs, the number of programs that remain that are continuing to create training for certifications that are no longer needed. While I think that's a critical pipeline question and a critical pipeline concern, the other half, or no, let me change that, the other part of this pipeline concern would be the workforce that is teaching or providing the training for the jobs and certifications that are required here. An ongoing concern that I have heard multiple times in these meetings, both from stakeholder groups as well as ROP programs and county offices, is that the workforce that is providing the training in K-12, in secondary programs, that workforce is not being replaced. And there is no plan, and no coherent plan to address how to develop, how to incentivize, how to recruit, and how to retain the workforce that is going to provide this training in our secondary programs. And so I appreciate the depth and the thoughtfulness in the analysis that went into this work and that went into this presentation, but you can't simply talk about the certification trainings that are no longer needed, that are still there, without also postulating about what it means particularly as it relates to these jobs and this particular part of the pipeline. Part of this pipeline has to be about the instructional force that's going to sustain this work and prepare this workforce for those certifications. So I think the pipeline discussion that you present here is very well done, but it's incomplete without thinking about that part of the picture. So I don't mean to criticize you because that's not your job, that's not your work, but I really do need you because you're the expert on what you presented here to make that assertion as well, because that's the charge of what our plan is about. Writing this plan requires us to address that part of this pipeline and workforce development conversation. And it's really important to hear from you that that's a concern as well.
So you are 1,000% correct, and I appreciate you raising it. I have a couple of sort of thoughts as I listen to you. So I think if I can grossly oversimplify, I think we've got 2 problems, at least 2 problems. But the 2 that spring to mind are this. So number 1 is, and you mentioned that, I'd called it out, which is, are we teaching the right things and are we aiming towards the right topics? And so there is a teaching core in our system that, like many others throughout our economy, needs to sort of reskill and retool to be able to do something that today's economy requires that yesterday's economy didn't, right? So that's teaching to these things, that's recognizing perhaps a different set of credentials and different set of skills for these new economies. But the part that I think you're sort of calling out is, well, we have a person shortage there as well. Like everybody else, the teachers aren't getting any younger, and some of them are going to be retiring, and some of them are going to change jobs and change careers, and so forth. And so being able to increase the inflow of folks into that sector to make sure that they are ready as well. We don't usually look at the education sector as a target sector, but of course it enables us to prepare folks sort of for everybody else. So yes, you're absolutely correct, and I would suggest even that skills adjacency sort of approach that I talked about with broadband, we might want to look at that vis-a-vis the teaching core. And I think we could say, okay, there's people in industry who maybe don't want to work in industry anymore. They know a lot of stuff, and they can bring that real world experience into the classroom. That's a skills adjacency. We might need to upskill them with teaching skills, right? Because they haven't been teaching, they've been doing. So that's sort of number one. Meanwhile, there might be folks that are in other sort of, maybe it's a corporate training role or some other kind of instructional capability, and that's the skills adjacency. So we need to give them some content expertise to be able to apply their teaching skills adjacency in a new way. The part that might concern me a little bit is that wage differential, right? And certainly from the industry side, and I hear this from manufacturers all the time, oh wow, we really need real world experience in the classroom, so the students get that benefit of the real world experience. Hey, great, can I have your shop foreman to come teach a class? Heck no, I need them on the shop all day and every day, right? And it's rarely to that individual's financial advantage to leave that production supervisor job to take a teaching job. And so there's a basic economics sort of factor at work that we need to consider when we think about these pathways. Is that a reasonable pathway? Is somebody going to take a pay cut? Maybe for a better schedule. And we need to sort of consider all of those factors when those actual or would-be teachers are deciding whether or not they're going to leave what they're doing now to satisfy the challenge that you've articulated. So those are just some initial thoughts. That might be another study we do together.
Appreciate it. And Joe, thank you so much for saying that. And you will attest that you and I have never met.
Never met.
And I didn't pay you to say that.
Nope.
I'm so glad you said that, because I would posit then you need to add another panel to the slide and talk about the education sector. Because without the education sector providing the training and the certification, that also supports the recovery, because they're the ones providing the expertise and the development of the pipeline for the people that will get into these other 5 areas. So I would posit that you should consider how to add the education sector as a panel, as an item.
Let's call that the learning economy.
Yeah, the learning economy. That would be perfect.
Right on.
And the other thing I want to point out, the state of California has had multiple opportunities to think about how to support the pipeline and encourage teacher recruitment, particularly in these areas. And, this is not the forum to get into talking about legislation, but there are opportunities and there are policies that will support and sustain that. And unfortunately, we've had an epic fail in California on trying to do those things. So I think that in forums like this and from experts like you, if we recognize the education economy as a critical part of what will drive the recovery because of how it contributes to and shapes the pipeline, I think it's important for us not to put that off the table. So thank you so much for being willing to hear me make that point and work with me on that.
Thank you for raising it. I appreciate it.
Always appreciate your insights, Member Rucker. Vice Chair Sun.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Simon. This is a fascinating, excellent presentation. So I appreciate you bringing this to us. So I actually have a comment too on that same slide. You had mentioned this, and it has to do with that, the remote economy, if you will. And you've alluded to several times now that with the pandemic has accelerated the how we do work, and that it's more and more distant. And I would say that as we evolve, it's not, the remote economy isn't just about data and software. It is actually something that is going across all types of different financial, all types of sectors, work sectors, financial industry, for instance, looking at remote tellers and things like that. So as working from a distance, working from home becomes more broad across all that. We go back to those soft skills you mentioned at the very beginning of your presentation. And it's a new set of soft skills that workers are now needing to. And we've all tried to navigate, for instance, what's the Zoom protocol to have a meeting, who gets recognized and all that. So this is a very evolving soft skills type of area, if you will. And I'm curious how that gets, I guess, addressed as we're looking at our state plan. And I've been struggling a little bit about, how do we put this into our state plan? Because I really do see this is going to be a future trend. And again, it's not like I don't think it's a remote economy in and of itself. I really think it is something that goes across all types of sectors. And so I guess, how do we address that when it's something that's evolving so quickly? But I do think it will accelerate very, very quickly as well.
Yeah, I mean, my thought is, so number one, the employer signaling on this is still a little bit muddy. Right. So for many years, we have had in our database a tag for job postings that say this job can be done remotely, or we will allow remote work on this. We are fairly confident that is a terrible undercount, right? That in more instances than not, an employer who might allow it maybe doesn't advertise it in that way. Now we expect that to change, and that has already changed, right? So the number that are calling that out explicitly has indeed increased. I still don't think it's increased to the point of being a totally accurate sort of number. So that's number one. I think number two is thinking about which jobs can and can't be done in a remote way. So sure, I can't give you my, deliver my hamburger to your table, from my home. But we're seeing, an engineering department and a production department in two different cities, whereas they used to be sort of under one roof. I think even to Member Rucker's sort of comments earlier in the education system, for a long time we assumed that sort of trades couldn't be taught online, and to some degree that's true, but it's not as true as it used to as simulations and sort of technology has improved. But I would also suggest that in career programming, career-oriented program, or general program for that matter, I think we should all ask ourselves, okay, so what is the remote feature of this going to be? Even if I'm a shop floor worker, maybe I need to communicate with the engineer or the sales floor or something, sort of through remote technology. Okay, so what is the remote feature of that work going to be? In rare instances, will that be zero? Right? And so we say, well, so what is that going to be? And so then the question becomes, okay, so how do I fulfill that part of my job? Is it I need to use a handheld device that I never had to use before? Mm-hmm. Is it that I need to look for visual cues? You and I are sort of looking at each other right now, right? And it's harder to sort of recognize some of those cues than if we were literally sitting across the table. Those are very different ways of realizing the potential of that remote work. And so the more we sort of understand and unpack how that is, that can in turn inform how the education system does or doesn't bake that into the programming.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's going to be just about every job will have some kind of remote aspect to it. A doctor that does video appointments, but then surgery, they would have to, of course, be in person. So there's going to be always some aspect of that. And how do you navigate the two, and what kinds of skills are needed? I think something that we definitely need to explore further.
All right. Are there any other comments or questions on the presentation? All right, seeing none from members. Thank you, Joel. Very informative, very helpful. I'm hoping that we'll be able to see you again in the future and get a lot more great information from you.
I would look forward to that. Thank you for having me. And of course, feel free to reach out if you want to continue the conversation. I would love that.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. So we are a little ahead of schedule, which is great. So let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break. So I show 10:36 now, so we can be back at 10:46, and then we'll jump right back in. Thank you, everyone. Welcome back. We need to establish a quorum to continue. So staff, would you please call the roll?
Chair Rawlings.
Present.
Vice Chair Sun.
Present.
Member Grande. Member McQuillan.
Here.
Member Rucker.
Here.
Ex officio Member McGuire. Ex officio Member Rattray. Member Williams.
Present.
Okay.
Thank you. We do have quorum. It is 10:47. So we'll continue on with item number 2. So I'd like to welcome back Daniel Trujillo, the Associate Director of Jobs for the Future, to continue our study session. Daniel.
Thank you so much, Chair Rawlings. Wanted to just quickly introduce our next speaker. We now have Joel Vargas, Vice President, a colleague at JFF, for a discussion around JFF's latest thinking about blurring the lines between education and the world of work, and other, and as well as a bold vision for an entirely new type of institution that can help remove the barriers between higher education and secondary education, and can lead to a stable family supporting careers, an institution that's designed specifically to better meet the needs of young people and help prepare them to succeed in the world of work. With that, I turn it over to Joel.
Thanks, Daniel. Can everyone hear me? Daniel, can you hear me? Okay, good. That's one of the most oft-quoted lines in the pandemic. It's really a pleasure to be here. I want to thank you, the committee, and individual members, just for inviting me to share time and perspective with you, and for allowing my colleagues and I to support your leadership in trying to support workforce pathways in California. So, as Daniel said, I'm a vice president based out of our office in Oakland, where we opened our West Coast presence in 2015. Though my oversight of programs is national in scope, and it has included over many years, many efforts designed to improve transitions of young people from high school to and through post-secondary credentials that have value in careers, good careers. So, I guess I would, and then I won't go into detail about JFF because Daniel says, all about us at this point. So I think I'm appearing today just to be a little bit provocative. Like my comments are designed that way, and be talking about a paper that was designed that way to really provoke kind of new kinds of thinking and conversation, and I hope action and policy change even in the field. I'm gonna ask you to really to kind of engage in a thought experiment with me that I hope might lead to sort of new insights for how to advance positive changes for California's young people. And maybe it'll interest you enough if you haven't taken a look at parts of the paper to take a closer look, but no worries if you haven't. I'll kind of go over the highlights. We recently published this paper that's called The Big Blur. And in it, I'll admit, we make a pretty audacious set of recommendations, which really question why we keep trying to build better bridges between high school, college, and careers, when those divisions are really vestiges of a past, an industrial age economy that it's no wonder they weren't designed to do what we need them to do for today's economy. And we lose students at every critical transition point in those divisions. So, now in a day and age where we really need more highly skilled post-secondary trained workers, maybe we need to design something different. So that's what this slide starts to depict, and Daniel alluded to it in my intro. We call for new structures that would better serve roughly 16 to 20-year-old young adults. One way to think about it, even though I hesitate because all these things kind of conjure the current systems and we're trying to get people to imagine something different. One way to think about it would be is like 2 years of college included in high school or 2 years of high school included in college. But in fact, the structures we're imagining would be neither high school nor community colleges as we know them, but rather new configurations for all students. And they would be free for students. So, by default would include some kind of post-secondary credential, as a part of public education. They would include guided pathways and labor market aligned sequences of work-based learning experiences, co-designed with regional employers, and would be designed to culminate in credentials that really give young people direct access to the labor market after grade 14, upon graduation, or if they chose to keep on going to further education in our really strong public higher ed system. So, although imperfect, right, admittedly. So that is the sort of that is the aspiration. And I'll admit the idea, like it feels like we're out on a limb on this one, and it is trying to inspire new kinds of imagining in this space, but it's also really born out of impatience. So, for one thing, so if someone could please move to the next slide. Oh, sorry about that little hiccup here. Yeah, it should be slide 2 with some data. Should I just keep going, Daniel? Oh, there we go. Okay. So the next slide 2 would have some data on it. And if it doesn't, I'm just going to keep going. So the slide will come up momentarily, I hope, but the impatience is kind of born out of seeing what have been, albeit improvements, but very incremental improvements in post-secondary attainment nationally that we're seeing. And since the Lumina Foundation, and others started measuring nationally, they're really like, oh, there we go. It's like, a percentage every year or two. And it's not moving as fast for the fastest growing populations in our country, Black, Latinx, and people from low income backgrounds. And while we're getting pretty good, or getting better anyway at increasing access, college access, too many students don't succeed. And when they don't, they go and they drop out and they take on hard to pay debt. And that actually ends up perpetuating economic inequity. So can we go to the next slide, please, or roll down? This is great. Thank you. So just to share a little bit about myself and what has inspired this as well, I bring kind of my own discontents and impatience to this. It includes my own experience as a first generation college goer. I was born and raised in San Francisco. My mom's Chinese. I grew up in Chinatown in the projects there. My dad's Mexican, born in Bakersfield, raised in the Mission in SF. Somehow they got together, pretty cool. No college going background in that family until the next generation. And my of which I'm the oldest, and my later professional experience as well was about, kind of drew on that personal experience in trying to support first generation college goers, really sort out and navigate through all the financing prerequisites, academic preparation, the right courses, the admissions processes. It's not to mention even the self-confidence or lack thereof and identity and sense of belongingness gaps that all feel like they're just designed to block these students from going to and completing college. Not to mention making sure they're on a post-secondary path aligned to career goals and gainful employment. So the little program I was raised in that helped me meet those challenges and later inspired others around the country and also including a few that I designed and led. Even if you put them all together, they're never going to be at sufficient scale to meet the need and overcome what are absurdly high barriers to access and success. So what attracted me to the work of early college high schools about 20 years ago, and when I came to JFF, was that it felt like a vision for creating a more streamlined set of transitions, what those could look like. And increasingly, over time, we incorporated technical and career pathways to valuable post-secondary credentials and degrees as a part of those early college schools. And that work was really gratifying, but it was also too frustratingly slow to grow and really arduous to operate because of the differences. The partnerships between the districts and the colleges had to reconcile between, their scheduling systems, their faculty requirements, their funding flows and restrictions, among other things. So our team, that's what kind of inspired the paper. We took note recently of seemingly rising interest in a range of efforts like early college and variations of those that are really trying to change post-secondary outcomes by reorganizing support systems, instructional delivery, guidance, financing, and work-based learning across K-12 and post-secondary. So to inform that report, can we go to the next slide, please? And I know this is going to be real small. We'll leave these behind with you, but we spoke with many innovative practitioners and policymakers and influencers. I think we spoke with over 50, including some notable Californians there who are implementing these kinds of approaches. And they included strong high schools, which found that simply preparing students for college, and they did so by many measures very well, it wasn't sufficient to see their students and graduates succeed in college. And they started, they're kind of, getting impatient and saying, let's extend our own support systems. Let's create a grade 13 year program. Let's develop online blended college courses and brick and mortar partnerships with colleges and work-based learning experiences with employers. And we'll provide the support because our students know us and trust us, and we can scaffold their building some momentum to them through the next steps. We talked to folks from colleges trying to reach down into high schools with dual enrollment opportunities. Sometimes, not enough, sometimes wedded with guided and career pathways that give students an accelerated boost into post-secondary programs of study. And we talked with colleges that are trying to increase efficiency and reduce costs through improved transfer, streamlined systems, and learn and earn partnerships. So I guess through the other folks we talked to were system leaders and some policymakers who were adjusting graduation requirements to make space for more future-oriented courses and experiential activities, or trying to use coordinated policymaking across systems to increase alignment and pathways. So a lot of these folks, for all their innovation, right, they're saying they designed these to really try to navigate through, but also were fundamentally constrained by systems fragmentation, policy disincentives, and really, frankly, like the mindsets of the archetypes about the structures and sequencing of how students move through education into the working world. Sort of like what everybody has gone through is sort of like what you're supposed to do. All right, so no one questions this anymore, even though there are a lot of signs that it's broken. So what we proposed in the Big Blurred really tried to flip the script. So what if instead of building models that work in spite of and around the systems, kind of like as Band-Aids, patches, and one-off workarounds, we built systems and new types of institutions that are made to do by design what the models are trying to fix and make them unnecessary, because what they do would become, in fact, the new normal by design. We go to we're on a good slide here. Our just to give you a sense, based on our work in the field and talking with folks who are innovating in this space, we came up with kind of at least four design features essential to this kind of system. One is you would need new types of incentives that are structured to promote new ways of organizing learning and support systems across grades 11 through 14. Systems would need to be held accountable for defined outcomes in this period, and current funding streams could be braided, used flexibly, and dedicated ones created as needed for systems who serve these students in these grades. We need to see intentional and required alignment of systems enabling 11th graders enter new institutional structures that incorporate high school and college requirements, designed for career prep and incorporating work experiences. So the structures would enable students to take steps on a career pathway, and also result again in credentials with labor market value by the end of grade 14, and the ability to keep going in their education if they want to. There should not be any dead ends in this kind of system. We need governance by a team or empowered senior leaders with decision-making authority to oversee, ensure funding for, and support an integrated and unified grades 11 through 14 system. That includes, pathways that are really aligned to the state's economic development priorities. And we need staff. We need kind of like rethinking of staffing structures to really equip specially trained educators and leaders to teach, to curate and organize learning and work experiences, and support systems for students in grades 11 through 14. It could be co-designed and reimagined by our top teachers in K-12 and colleges, including those from technical areas and with industry experience, who know what it takes to support students in this age group and help them make a more seamless transition into adulthood in highly skilled jobs. So I know these are tall orders. That said, we're dreaming a little, we're dreaming a lot, but there were some states that we've seen nationally that are actually taking some steps in this direction. I won't go through, why don't we just take a look at the next couple of slides so you get a flavor. I won't go through them in detail. I'll leave them behind for your reference. I also am careful in any state, especially in California, about citing specific state examples, because I don't want to suggest that these are, you should just import these. That makes no sense for any state to do. But just to give you, just for illustrative purposes, what some states are doing, some are really making adjustments to graduation requirements and accountability systems that encourage their schools to increase the completion of early post-secondary and career experiences by students. So they're creating room to do that and encouraging K-12 to do more of those kinds of things. There's funding sometimes for grade 13 programming, designed, I mentioned earlier, to help students build momentum in post-secondary programs of study with support of their high schools. And even sometimes some scholarships for students to avail themselves of the same early college and work opportunities. Some states are even paying on the basis of post-secondary outcomes, and Texas districts get a per pupil bonus now for particular college enrollment kinds of outcomes and completion of post-secondary certificates, among other incentives. So I also think that there's some low-hanging fruit, albeit still that would require a substantial stretch for states and locals to take steps towards blurring the lines. So for example, if states design dual enrollment as an integral part of guided and career pathways, validated by regional employers, and extending into high school and counting towards state admissions requirements, like A through G in California, and if they were part of clear transfer pathways, kind of like California's associate's degrees for transfer, I could argue that this is starting to resemble a vision for the big blur. You can put those pieces together, even though the systems kind of they haven't naturally lent themselves to that kind of design. But there are building blocks. So I'm just gonna as if I haven't waxed philosophical already, I'm gonna take it up even a little bit higher and just say I think in order to do any of this and make advances on big blurring, we need to recognize that a significant barrier to realizing the vision would be the hard work of changing the public's collective mindset about public responsibility. Part of why, and we argue this in the paper in the back, why there's such a great and durable divide between secondary and post-secondary is college is largely seen as an individual's responsibility. And the returns of that education are seen as largely being private. But, we are arguing that like bridges and roads and fire departments, post-secondary education ought to be a public responsibility. It fulfills communal needs and should be really accessible, even expected for all. And it goes beyond making it free, although that's an important aspect, right? That's had a lot of currency in our national conversations. It's about our responsibility to develop the structures and the systems that ensure students are able to succeed. So if we can, begin to adopt a view that 2 years of college is not a public good, but a public responsibility, then, we argue that can help solve the challenges we face in college access and completion. And we got to be bigger and bolder about it. Relatedly, like creating demand, we need to create narratives that create new demand for and legitimize new kinds of models and systems. And free college, that conversation is both a positive and negative. It seems to be off the table right now. So this point may be moot, but I don't think it's going away, just as states continue to see interest in this in localities. I think on the one hand, it would be a landmark change. On the other, it ironically could make public and policymakers think that our work is done. We made it free. And we know it's much more complicated than that. There's more work to do. We got to really get parents and young people not just to call for free college, but to seek out and demand better paths to and through college that result in good careers. And some of that work is going to require building and pointing to successful outcomes of good models that can shine a light on needed systems changes. So we got to kind of like build some proof points around what this can look like. We see opportunities in federal stimulus funding as well, probably mostly for regions that have already started going down a blurry path, if you will, because those ESSER dollars did not come with many requirements. So that's good and bad, right? And talk all day about a lot of the good stuff. I think the challenging part is, finding folks who are already committed to this agenda and having them see that there are ways to spend that money to advance that. Let's see, what else? I can tell you our role, how we're thinking about this going forward. Our next phase of work at JFF about this is trying to advance the vision by understanding how we could drive it through different units of change, including systems and policy, models, model development, model spread, regional work, and a campaign to shift narratives and mindsets. So don't be surprised if you see us talking more about this. We're also hopeful that there may be a handful of states where there might be kind of a coalescence of several of those kind of conditions that could be leveraged to build a big blur demonstration at a state level. So anyway, I'm done talking for now and ready to take questions. In the remaining time, I'd really welcome your thoughts and questions about this vision framework and how it's potentially helpful or not as you consider making systems changes to advance workforce pathways that support our regional economies in the state.
Right. Thank you for that, Joel. So in a moment, we're going to be asking for public comment. So if members of the public would like to make public comment, we're going to put the slide up here in a moment to explain how you do that. But feel free to begin typing away on email or in the Q&A or in the chat. And while members of the public are preparing their comments, I'm wondering if there are any comments or questions from members of the committee. Member Grande.
Thank you, Chair Rawlings, and thank you immensely, Joel, for the presentation. I am particularly interested in learning more about how states can embrace the idea of making post-secondary education a public responsibility, so much so that it is anticipated that every single high school senior will immediately transition into post-secondary education, and we facilitate the process by which more high schools participate in dual enrollment opportunities so that we begin to see the the number of associate degrees conferred upon high school graduation would rival those that Texas saw in the 1819 year?
Yeah, it's a great question. I have no simple answers. I have one approach that I've seen though that I really believe in, that at the risk of repeating myself a little, but it's iterating on a theme. I think there's nothing like experiencing success in taking a future step, into college and career. That's where I think the magic is in work-based learning experiences and in good, well-designed early college experiences and dual enrollment. When it's structured correctly, and students experience some success, they come to have an expectation all of a sudden. There's just a change of, I can do this. This is for me, and maybe I should keep going. And I think, we've unfortunately set up the system where, as I alluded to earlier, college is only for a few, or it's very selective. Or when we talk about it, we only talk about the highly selective institutions, like leaving out some of our strong broad access institutions. Again, they're imperfect as they are. I mean, they really are like they can be the engines of a great middle class in our country and have been in the past. So I just think, making sure that people have some experience with that as part of what they do in high school can be a game changer and can start to build some of this changing of mindset.
That's great. Member Grande.
I just wanted to pivot just slightly on that. How do we reconcile the idea of college for all high school along with the initiatives on apprenticeship, where we're recognizing that not every high-paying job requires a college education? So how have states bridged those two policies together so that both are equally successful?
It's a great question, and I think it is so important to. It might be cliche at this point, but it is because it's so important. Is when we talk and speak the language that we're saying college and career, not college or career. I think that's first of all, just in terms of mindset and rhetoric, it's a trap to fall into. Apprenticeship. First of all, a lot of them, do have some kind of post-secondary credit component to them if they're designed well, and that's in part, Member Grande, part of my answer to your kind of design question. Is the more we can make that transparent and actually do that by design with apprenticeship, show the connections to credit, to college credit, and design it so that they bear, you get the experience and you get the credit. As I said, a lot of them are in high value careers built that way anyway. We need to sort of show that it is part of the same preparation for good careers. And I guess when you say college, a lot of, again, this is all bound up in our mindsets, right? A lot of what's conjured in people's minds is not the technical college. They're like, Harvard's not for me, like we're not talking about that. You need some post-secondary after high school. You need some kind of training or education after high school. So that's another thing we say, in order to be competitive in the labor market. So, and then a lot of the other work is, as I alluded to, kind of by good design to create routes. We're going down one path, doesn't preclude you from continuing on your education should you choose to do that.
Thank you for that response. I'm hoping that at some point in time in the future, we begin to contextualize what that apprenticeship experience is in terms of upper level higher education components, because I know that many of our automobile mechanics and our air conditioning and refrigeration take a level of math that is contextualized to the occupation that rivals what they would have received in transfer level math, and yet we discount it because the prefix on that course was not MATH but rather ACR.
Very good point, Member Grande. Yeah, I know there are some really great examples out there, particularly in connections with building construction trades and those kind of things that exemplify some of this apprenticeship and having college and career kind of combined. So I think that's a wonderful point you make. Member Williams.
So I just had a couple comments. They're really a question, but I don't yet know how to word it into the question, but I think it's fascinating. I personally went to a vocational and technical high school back in the early 90s. And, so just, seeing what you all are talking about is just fascinating for California, because schools aren't really built that way to like the physical structures to have, or at least in my area, to have some career technical education, but then also some college stuff mixed into it. The question that I had around Member Grande's comments about how do we get the public to take the responsibility, parents, what are your thoughts around educating parents about these options? And then do you think that would create the demand to get parents to push for, we want to see more of this kind of stuff? What do you think about that?
I totally agree, Member Williams. I mean, I don't have the answer here. I mean, as you heard in my presentation, I think that is a really big piece of work that we cannot underestimate. It is the mindsets around. I think we can probably take some lessons from, I don't want to go too far down a rabbit hole here with you, but it's just making me think that we did a really good job at College for All over the years. Like there were, we really, that was a story that the public began to understand. And I think we may have overdone it in some ways, because it ended up like seemingly somehow unintentionally crowding out, ironically, like the career piece that you could do as a part of high school. And as other members have said already more eloquently than I, those two go together, and that is a harder thing to talk about. And like the nuance, right, is harder to communicate and message, but I think we have to do it. Because there is some sign right now, and I do think there is an opportunity. There's some survey data coming out that are showing young people, like in the COVID moment, just exacerbated it. They sort of said, I can't take the time to spend 4 years doing college. I would love a model where I could do it in 3, or I'm interested in other approaches where I get some experience, learn and earn at the same time, and do more of that, or it's structured that way. So I do think, and they're questioning the return on, the investment that they're making, including the debt load, and wondering like, well, what does this lead to in terms of a career? So I do think there's a moment to kind of get that messaging more nuanced and right, but it is going to be a harder nut to crack, especially when, like, kind of going back to my original formulation, what people have in their minds is the traditional sort of set of transitions, and frankly, some, this kind of stereotypes and notions about, college is for some kids, and for the ones that are not, they're going to work with their hands. And, like, that's not the way our economy is built anymore, in fact. So anyway, just some responses and affirmation.
Definitely appreciate that, and the importance of blurring these lines is so important, especially as we take a look at how some of the more advanced CTE career fields are really going to require more college in addition to any of the apprenticeship programs and things that they may have eligible for them. So definitely appreciate these comments. Are there any other comments from members of the committee? And seeing none, then we will move to public comment. Are there any public comments?
Yes, Chair Rawlings. We have a comment and a question in our Zoom Q&A from Clinton Maxwell, Mendocino County Office of Education. He writes, our housing prices still outpace wage growth, and even pre-fires, we had a less than 1% vacancy rate for lack of supply. Employers are desperate to hire anyone who can take an entry-level role in a challenging work context at a non-livable wages. These factors with inflation are starting to drive a local recession. High-bar work-based learning like paid internships are the way we will build homegrown labor force pipelines of appropriate workers who are day one ready. Failure to do this is creating an existential crisis for our local business and will exacerbate the coming local economic crisis. How can County Office of Education's support our districts with workers' comp liability issues for countywide work-based learning projects? It is a very large ask in a rural county to have our limited number of industry partners assume this risk when their employee sizes are 10 people. Thank you for your time. Clinton.
All right. Are there any other public comments? All right. Seeing none, are there any online or via phone?
There are no more at this time.
All right, then we will conclude public comment on item number 2. Want to give a big thanks again to all of our presenters today, and really appreciate all this feedback. It's been a great study session. I think there's so much more that we could unpack, and we could just keep on going. So definitely appreciate you, Joel, for spending your time with us. So we are a bit ahead of schedule, and so we had expected to have this take us through to lunch. But since we are not at that time yet, I would say let's keep on moving and move on to item number 3. Item 3 is the Career Technical Education Incentive Grant and the K through 12 Strong Workforce Program update for 2021 application process and timeline, and kindergarten through 14 technical assistance providers and workforce pathways coordinators. So I would like to welcome back Pete Callis, the director of the Career and College Transition Division, along with Yana Yatridis, the Dean of Workforce Division at the California Community College Chancellor's Office, to update us on CTEIG and K-12 Strong Workforce programs.
Thank you, Chair Rawlings. So yeah, this will be brief. We gave a longer presentation at our last meeting in September and the update. So this one will not take very long for us to get through. Next slide, please. So, no, that's okay. So again, these are our sister programs between us and the community college. So we have the Career Technical Education Incentive Grant Program here at CDE, and the Chancellor's Community College Office houses the K-12 Strong Workforce Program. That's 1 second. All right. Next slide. Okay. So for the CTEIG program, as we said before, we released the RFA back in April 2021. Applications were due in June. We received some additional legislation to the program with AB 130, the budget bill, which added some requirements to our programs. In September, we rolled out 2 addendums that were additional to the CTEIG application process. Addendum 1 was for the match with CTEIG, and they are required to obligate their match during the first year of the grant period. Compared to in the past, it was over the life of the grant period. And so the second addendum was if districts wanted to identify any of their advanced placement, international baccalaureate, or dual enrollment programs that were CTE based, they could add those to their application. So that was addendum 2. And those were due on October 13th. Next slide. So these were, the other change on this was the total funding for the CTEIG program was doubled from 150 million to 300 million. So it gives us some more flexibility with the funding process and hoping we can get some more money out this year to those grantees. Next slide. As we receive the addendums, we received 356 addendum 1 forms. One of the LEAs that had originally applied requested to be pulled out of the program for this year. 331 of the 356 addendums that were submitted had no change to their match. So they were able to keep their match intact and have it obligated during the first year of the grant. We had 25 applicants with a change to their match. And then also on addendum 2, we had 10 submissions for addendum 2. So we concluded that a lot of them that had AP or IB or dual enrollment programs, they had already had them in their original application. So that's why we figured there was such a small amount for this submission. Our goal is to get the allocations to the state board for approval at the January State Board of Education meeting. Next slide. And this is just a chart of the process for the K-12 Strong Workforce Program and their timeline. I'll turn this over to Yana Iritrides.
Thank you, Director Callis. As I mentioned last time, we successfully released the Round 4 RFA on August 16th and conducted, of course, the bidders conference, and the applications were due October 15th, and selection committee deliberations are actually concluding today, November 19th, with preliminary awards being announced on November 30th. And of course, appeals will be due to the regional consortia by December 14th. And by December 24th, the regional consortia will communicate the intent to award funds to the LEAs and initiate the sum contract process with the project beginning in January. Next slide, please. So the California Community College Chancellor's Office received 236 K-12 Strong Workforce Program 2021-2022 applications with $176,601,028 in total funds requested. So as I stated before, we are anticipating that as the deliberations can conclude today, that we'll have more information for you at the next meeting. Back to Director Callis.
So I had a follow-up comment on this item that I'd like to do something at the January meeting. My staff has been working diligently on developing work-based learning programs and opportunities for students across the state. So for the January CWPJAC meeting, I'd like to have a presentation on the work-based learning programs that we've been developing over the past 5 years, which will include youth apprenticeship programs that are really rolling out quickly here with a number of our industry sectors, along with student internships and paid student internships. I know there was some interest from CWPJAC members regarding this and how we can put this in place. So these are programs that we've been developing, like I said, over the last 5 years, and I'd like to do a presentation at the January meeting so we can start rolling those out and start getting that narrative out on what we're doing for our students and getting that work-based learning experience for them out in the field. And
that's great. Yeah, very helpful to know. So I know this is an item that Member Williams has a particular interest in. And I was wondering, Member Williams, do you have a question or a comment on this?
I guess I jumped the gun. I was super excited. I was like, yeah, cool. Mm-hmm. So yeah. I'll wait till January.
There you go. You'll load up your questions for sure.
Yeah.
So are there any other member comments or questions? Seeing none from members of the committee, are there any public comments on this item?
There are none at this time.
All right, then we will close the public comment period for this item. That will move us to item 4, and I was just wanting to check in with Director Callis. Do we have our staff support in place? I think it was Mr. Eisler and Mr. Bjorkman that were going to join you on this. If not, we can take a few minute break.
They are. They were planning on coming. They saw the agenda and they were planning on coming on just before 1 o'clock. So I don't know if we want to just break for lunch now and come back, and I can get them on at 12:30.
What's the purpose of the committee?
Thomas is actually on, so.
Yes, okay. And would you want to grab Mr. Eisler?
He is actually.
We could take a 10-minute break if it helps.
He's not available today, so it'll be.
Got it.
It'll be Mr. Bjorkman and I for this piece.
All right. So, members, would you prefer to continue? I'm seeing some heads nodding there. All right.
Yeah, power on.
There we go. Ahead of schedule, staying ahead of schedule. So then, Pete, it'll be back to you. Pete Callis, our director of the Career and College Transition Division, joined by Thomas Bjorkman, the Education Research and Evaluation Consultant of the Measurement and Accountability Reporting Division, AMARD, who will continue our conversations around data.
Perfect. Thank you, Chair Rawlings. So going forward with our data presentation, we did do an extensive one and we had a long discussion at the last meeting. So I wasn't planning on going over all the data again. I know that we have our recommendation for moving forward, and we did discuss it at the last meeting. So we do have some new data information that we wanted to introduce today for future thoughts about including in the data metrics, not actually in this round, because it wasn't part of our original plan. So, but we are pursuing other data metrics that we feel will be integral in showing how successful our programs are in CTE for the California Department of Education, along with the California Chancellor's Office work that we're doing. So next slide, please. So CDE staff and California Community College Chancellor's Office staff recommend continuing the use of the Career Technical Education Incentive Grant data metrics 1 through 6 that are available to measure and evaluate program outcomes for our current applicants. As we stated in the last meeting, we have data for the cohort 18-19 currently for CTEIG. We don't have a cohort yet for the K-12 Strong Workforce Program because it started later. We will have a cohort here in the near future for them that we can use as our baseline moving forward. Next slide. So one of the requests from Vice Chair Sun was to look at some different ways at evaluating some of the data that we had at our last meeting. And so what we looked at was just this is all of our regular data that we had, and we wanted to compare it to other data that you'd requested. So next slide. And this is where we took this for you, Vice Chair Sun. This was one of the questions I believe you had correct on the social, can't even think. These are our non-SED students.
Yeah.
And so we looked at these numbers and they look pretty promising, especially on the ELA side, English Language Arts assessment piece. And so we looked at these, we discussed it with our team from the AMARD group, and, as I said, they do look pretty good overall. So, Thomas?
Yeah, like I said, I think I would share and caveat these data. You know, if we really wanted to do a deeper dive and have some questions about it, we want to include our colleagues in the assessment development division, and they could share, you know, possibly more about what they feel this indicates in regards to CTE programs and CTE completers.
Okay, next slide. Oh. It's still on 3A. Oh, okay. These are our SCD numbers. It just switched on me so quick. So yeah, as we look at these, we look at, you know, how our students are doing in comparison to our non-SED students. And it still looks promising for the English language arts assessment side. Thomas, any comments on this one?
No, I mean, I think the data speaks for itself.
So then we moved on to member Rutgers' request to look at the claims based on smarter balance. And one of the caveats that we looked at with this is that the smarter balance assessment has been compressed due to the pandemic. So they shortened the test for students. And so one of our concerns that we brought up was that because it's shorter, there's less items in each of the claims. So we were concerned about validity and reliability, but the California assessment provider, Smarter Balance, confirmed that the validity and reliability of the area claims are still valid and reliable, even with the compressed size of the assessment in English language arts and mathematics. So looking at this, if you look at one of the pieces that's changed from the previous slides to this is the colors have been reversed. So in this, below standard is blue. In the previous slides, so we don't have any confusion, it was the higher of the standards. So, and even looking at this now, we have between near standard and above standard for reading, we're at almost 75% across the board, right? So if these are valid and reliable, as Smarter Balance says they are, our students are doing really well. Our CTU students are doing well. They're keeping up with everybody else, or even doing better in some cases, right? So some positives out of this. Next slide. And same thing with writing. You know, we see some real positive information here. Our CTE completers are at 80% of near standard or above standard. And even the 30% range is good for our 35%. So for all students, it's at 33%. You look at the CTE completers and they're above that. So we're doing really well with our CTE students, even on this piece. Thomas, any comments on either of these?
No, I just to caveat though, these data, because it was the 18-19 cohort, these assessment scores were not impacted by by COVID and the compressed assessment. I do know that you know, obviously 1920 was impacted significantly, and there was limited data to report there. And I do believe the upcoming score reports right now, because of the compressed aspect of the assessment, if you actually go look at the ADAD webpage and look at some of the sample student score reports, they are not doing area or claim scores any longer. And I don't know if that's going to continue as well, just in large part because of those item numbers. So I don't know the future of these claim and area scores.
Could I interject here, Chair Rawlings?
Of course, yeah.
Yes, hi, this is Patricia DeCoste with the State Board Office. The board approved the use of the assured blueprints for English language arts and mathematics. So for the 2020-21 school year, we used a shortened test form, and that form will continue. So we will be using that in the 2021-22 2022 school year. So there will be no claim scores for the last year's school year as well as this upcoming school year. Just wanted to clarify. Thank you.
Next slide, please. And then the listening piece also shows some positive results for the claims from the 18-19 cohort. So actually overall, we're still doing well. And next slide. And then research and inquiry, which, you know, this is something that CT students should have in their back pocket with the work that they're doing and with work-based learning and all of their activities and skills that they're developing. This should be one of their key skills that they should have some strength in. And just looking at the results of this, they're doing really well overall. Whoops. And next slide. Nope. Oh, indicator 3. All right, number of pupils meeting a score of 2 or higher on the Smarter Balance mathematics assessment, and looking at mathematics, you know, mathematics is what it is. And so reviewing mathematics and their claims, it really, with our CTE students, it truly aligns with where we are in the performance trend with mathematics across the state. They're still lagging behind, just like the regular scores that we're looking at in mathematics compared to English language arts, and that will be clear when we look at the claim scores here in a minute. So one of the areas we really, and in our discussions with our AMART team, you know, you've got a number of us that were math teachers when we were teachers, and understanding that piece is, you know, what are we going to do across the state to get this across to students and help them increase their mathematics skill set. So next slide. And then we look at the mathematics piece with the non-SED students. Again, it's directly in line with the English language arts and just the lag that we have in our scores between the two areas. Next slide. And then here's our SED students, and you can see that the standard not met level is way higher on this piece as we look at this. Thomas, any comments on math?
I'm fine.
Okay. Looking at indicator 3B, same thing. You know, as we look at the scores, standards not met, and along with standards nearly met, the 2 and the 1, they're still the highest compared to the other 2, with standards at level 3 and then exceeded at level 4. So it's the trend, performance trend that we have across the state. Next slide. So now we go to the claims. And this is, again, where the colors have flipped. So below standard is blue, so it directly reflects what's going on just across the state. But at our last state board meeting, State Board President Linda Darling Hammond did state that even though there's this lag and our scores are low in mathematics, she did state that the performance gaps are narrowing across the board. So we are doing some good things in the classroom, and our CTE students are keeping up and doing well. Next. And then problem solving, modeling, and data analysis. Again, this is where one of the areas where our CTE students really need to perform, and you see the CTE completers, they're at the highest rate, at least with near standard. And when you take near standard and above standard, especially in this area, they're almost at 60%, which is not a bad score in the mathematics area. Thomas, anything on this one? Pretty consistent. Okay.
Sorry about that. I was just unmuting myself. I was just going to add to, once again, I think if we wanted to do a deep dive, we can talk to the ADAP folks in terms of just because there are only 3 achievement level descriptors here, one of which is indicated below. And when comparing with the actual assessment, you've got your 4 achievement levels. So I just wanted to point that out as well, because I don't know if there's a complete mapping there.
Got it. All right, next slide. And then communicating reasoning, communication is big when we're looking at work-based learning and just our CT activities and skills that we're developing. So this is an area that, as you see, our CT completers are at the highest rate, again, with over 70%. We're about 71% with these students at near standard or above standard. And as Thomas said, if we broke this down into the 4 categories, it may look a little different, just depending on the breakdown of those. Next slide. And back to our recommendation, this is where we are with this and how we'd like to move forward with at least this year. And some of the other data that we want to look at is attendance data on seeing the difference with our CTE students and how their attendance trends are, if that's keeping them engaged in school and keeping them in school and getting them to school every day. And we'll be looking at other data pieces also going forward. And back to you, Chair Rawlings.
Right. Thank you for that. And I'll call on committee members here, and we'll start with Member Rucker.
Well, first of all, Dr. Callis, I want to thank you and your team for the work that you did in preparing for today's report. This has been a long time coming, and this data study, this data analysis is something that's very, very important to this committee. And thank you so much in particular for putting together the information about the claims report. And I asked for that purposely because I knew with the board's action to adopt the shorter version of the Smarter Balanced Assessment, that the claims data was not actually going to be available to us to see and to study for a while. And this is actually important, especially since your item comes right behind on the agenda, the report on the applications, both for the Strong Workforce program as well as the Career Technical Education Incentive Grants. In writing and developing the content for those grants, those along with our state Perkins grant application, we are accountable in those programs for trying to figure out in some way how to quantify the instructional impact of the students' participation in those programs. And members on this panel may recall for quite some time, the state board members were really had a laser focus on how we differentiated what was being reported on the accountability data for the Perkins Plan application, because it seemed like the standards for those programs were so much lower. But we finally came to a point where we were able to figure out how to put that information together. But what we clearly have not done yet, both in all 3 of these programs and categories of funding, is we're clearly not yet helping the recipient LEAs understand how to explain in their grants how they are looking at this data and this evidence and information to articulate the instructional impact of their programs. So it was particularly telling with the math and the gap in the performance of students in the math programs. Here's an opportunity for us to look at how the instructional impact of CTE programs and the participants in those 4 categories, how their academic achievement is actually improved as a direct result of the instructional programs that they participated in CTE. How can we differentiate and find those things? I find it compelling and very important that there are actual parallels and even similarities in the patterns of academic outcomes both for English language arts, which is quite high, and mathematics, which is quite low. So we have a unique opportunity, both in the Strong Workforce Program and in the CTEIG grant, to really understand what the instructional impact is, because as it has been pointed out, the scores are going up. Over time, is there going to be a significant improvement or significant quantifiable and observable difference that can be reported for these programs that we see as a pattern in this data from what we're seeing in the general population as a whole? So here is our opportunity, and the lessons that we're actually getting, or at least what I'm finding in what you presented, is we have to be clear on whose impact and on what, and what are the factors in the programs we're actually holding the programs accountable for. That is something we were tasked to do in writing the Perkins grant application, and frankly, we never fully accomplished that with that explanation. We checked off the boxes, but the accountability and the charge by the federal government in the mandate to close the achievement gap for the performance of students who are participating in those Perkins funded programs, we've never articulated that well in that grant. So we have an opportunity here in the data mining that we are doing for these programs to look at what can be the iterative process we do in our data science and our data analysis for these two programs that will help us not only just simply report the outcomes, but to articulate whether these outcomes show that the programs are having the impact that the legislature clearly understood. So I'm glad that we stuck with our guns on looking at and looking for this data and pushing to get this report today. Because what it does help us understand is what is the data that we have to use to ascertain the outcomes from these two programs. It's not enough just to simply gather the data report, but then to ask the question, what does it mean about these programs? I think we have to have, even though we're not going to see the claims data for a few years, I would assert that the claims data that we saw today is a reasonable and reliable baseline for us to understand students' capabilities in relation to these set of outcomes. And the reality is, by the time we start seeing data again, that will be an entirely different cohort of students. It won't be an apples to apples comparison, because we won't be talking about the same group of students, but it is still going to be very relevant data, because it will help us understand whether or not the instructional impact of those programs has grown in scope and impact and has actually improved to improve outcomes for each successive cohort of students. I think that this is an opportunity going forward for this panel to think about what would be some of the evidence-based practices for data analysis and data science that we can use with this report, so that we're not simply just getting the report and seeing the data and being awestruck by it and being very pleased to see it, but also what are the big questions or the essential questions then we should ask about the program recipients. So then when we turn around and see this data for the program recipients for the CTEIG, did they in their grant applications address how the evidence from this data shows the impact of their program? And the same thing then would be true for the Strong Workforce grant recipients. How did they use the data that's shown and apparent in this to address what is the instructional impact for the programs that they are funding? Because that's the purpose of the matrix of metrics, is for us not just to collect data about the programs, but to show that the programs are having an important instructional impact for this group of students as a class, so that we're not just simply checking off a box of exercises we're doing to meet compliance, that we're going beyond compliance to the actual point of accountability in studying what this data says, what it shows, what it proves, and what it means. So I want to thank you and your team so much for what you put together today, because as I looked at this, there's so many comments I want to make about the information that was shown, but that's a time for that's a conversation for another agenda. I think there's an opportunity to do a really deep dive on this, with the next cohort of grant recipients so that we can see not only what they are reporting, but what we can hold them accountable to show improvement for so that they can prove that they are worthy to be funded again. Thank you so much.
Appreciate those comments, Member Rucker. I completely agree. Vice Chair Sun, you're next, and then Member Williams.
Yeah, so great points, my colleague, Member Rucker. And then also, I also want to add my thanks to the staff for putting together the additional analysis. This is so much more information than we've received in the past, and I just so appreciate the work that you guys are going through and doing. And I understand the caution of making drawing some conclusions yet on some of this preliminary data, but I agree with Member Rucker that it's a very good start for us and for us to move forward. And I think as long as we know that there have been some bumps in some of the data and that there will be, because of the COVID and some of the impacts of that, we're going to see some up and down. So we're not going to see like a clear trend over the next few years necessarily. But I think as long as we continue to look at this information, it will be helpful for us to pivot on some of the policy decisions that we'll be making. Let's see what else I want to say. But yeah, in general, thank you very much. I know that we're not ready to make those changes to the metrics, matrix of metrics yet. Still, I've been a bit impatient over the last few years to say, well, let's get to the right data. If we need to make changes, let's do it. But I understand more as to how we really need to explore more of the information and data that we currently have before we make those changes. So again, appreciation to the staff for drawing that out and for the extra work that you've done.
Thanks, Vice Chair Sun. Member Williams.
Hey, so I really appreciate the comments. And so I'm just coming out of corporate America, y'all. And so my question for Member Rucker and for the CDE team, to shorten the amount of time that it takes to, and I'm just thinking about live data and making I don't know if on the fly adjustments is the right word, but is there a way to use leading indicators to shorten the amount of time that it takes to make adjustments? How do we get data? Because in education, it seems like it takes us years to study something and then really figure out whether we can make the adjustment. And so keeping respect of the rigor of that kind of process, but are there shorter elements or other indicators, like a leading indicator that we could use to get technical assistance out to grantees sooner versus waiting for a whole new cohort? And is that possible in this kind of in what you're pushing to achieve?
Thomas, are you still on?
Yeah, I mean, I can address that. I think one of the exciting things is our last meeting, this was a request, and we turned around and pivoted on as quick as possible. I know we're doing a push right now to get a bunch of Perkins stuff done. So we've got Corey and myself, and Corey's on this call somewhere. We've got a big push, but we're going to be processing a lot of data. We've got some science test data coming in. We're going to be looking at some attendance data because we just, there's some preliminary kind of things we've looked at. So hopefully we're going to be a little bit more agile and be able to meet this. I'm new to this conversation. It's been very exciting for me to be here. Pete's new here. And I think we're hoping to be able to provide you guys data and you guys don't wait for the meetings. I mean, if you guys want to reach out to Pete and I think both Member Rucker and Member Sun, I kind of picked up on what they were saying at the last meeting, but if something comes up tomorrow, or at a later date, and you guys have some data conversations, let's not wait for these meetings and be more agile and see if we can turn stuff around for you.
And Chair Rawlings, I'm with Thomas on that. With anything you guys need, anything you come up with that you want us to look at, we meet once a week. My team and Thomas and Jonathan, we all meet, and Corey and Mark. And so we discuss different ideas on data every single week. and we kind of get excited and become data geeks for a while in our meetings. But for me, I look at it, I was a high school principal for a number of years, so I look at it from the site level, and what Member Rucker was saying is holding schools accountable. And I held myself accountable as a principal, and I always looked at the data and how we can make things better. And that's how I use the data across my campus. So total agreement with the comments that we've heard thus far. And getting that real-time data that Member Williams was talking about, that'll be huge. And I know we're working on some data systems right now. They're not rolling out yet, but we've had some discussions on being able to get real-time data when we need it. So I know it's in the works right now.
And since Jonathan did put me in the question, let me also respond. This really does go to when we have the information, what do we do with it? And so we don't have, I'm going to be very careful with the next sentence I say. So having all of this data and having piles and piles of numbers about schools and students is one thing. Figuring out how to consume that information and make it presentable and consumable to others of our community partners, that's the data science that we're sitting on the cusp of in this conversation here. And so, here on the board for my entire tenure on the board, we have had this conversation about what the cycle of inquiry and action learning and school improvement actually looks like. And so, Commissioner Williams, that's really what your question is getting to. We now have this matrix of metrics, and it's the charge of this panel to advise the legislature whether or not the data that we are using to evaluate these two grant programs is actually the correct data for us to be using. And so seeing this information for the first time, we have to figure out how to study it, what questions we should be asking about it, and how do we ask the grant recipients to use this information and to evaluate what it tells them about their programs and the work that they are doing on their programs. So that's the data culture that you're asking about, and that's the culture that's evolving. So it's important that we continue to have those three very important elements of patience, persistence, and humility. So Ting and I have been very persistent in pushing for this data report and very patient. So now that we have this data, we have to figure out how to ask about it, how to talk about it, and how to report it back to our recipients and task them to respond to it in ways that are meaningful. That is the next part of the conversation. That's a register of English I'm not equipped to speak, and I'm going to rely on people like Peter and Thomas to hear my painfully inept questions, knowing that I'm asking the question in the wrong way, and parrot it back to me and filter it in ways that become both discernible but also usable for the purposes we intend this matrix to be. I hope that was helpful, Joseph.
That was definitely helpful, Member Rucker. And I would echo a couple of things here. One is the excitement over the data, right? And that we've been able to get to a point, having been here a couple of years, hearing Vice Chair Son and Member Rucker talk about the importance of taking a deeper look at this data and how do we examine this. And then also, Dr. Callas, having heard you say that there's some potential for being able to get some real-time data in the future, which I think is very exciting, very remarkable. My comment to Member Williams was going to be that, in education, our data moves fairly slowly usually. But if there's some opportunities there to be able to respond and react and to be able to coach schools and districts a little more proactively, I think that is really wonderful news that we may be able to get to a point where we're taking a look at the data a little sooner than a year to 2 to 3 years out. So appreciate that quite a bit. A question I've got about some of the data really is how disaggregated can we go? And the reason I ask it, and this is really the point of the question, is as we take a look at the data, are we able to effectively identify positive outliers, and finding places where they are doing a disproportionately good job at communicating, kind of mathematics and having better math outcomes, and some that might have SED students that are doing better than what we'd expect. Are we able to look that deep and then go back and inquire with them about what are some of the methodologies that they're using in instruction and non-instruction spaces that are helping to empower that kind of learning?
So I'll comment real quick, and then Thomas, you can jump in. So some of our CTE programs that I was responsible for when I was over the High School Innovations and Initiatives Office, an example of that is we have mentor sites for some of our CTE programs that we've identified because of their performance. And so I think going forward, like you stated, Chair Rawlings, is we need to identify those sites and make them as mentors. We have, for our California Partnership Academy program, we have 400 academies across the state. We have 20 Lighthouse Academies that we've identified that assist with this. And they assist other academies when they're struggling, and we bring them together in planning sessions, and they restructure their planning and try to make a difference and make those changes so they could become Lighthouse Academies or mentors in the future. So I'd like to see that type of model going forward for all of our CTE programs.
Great. That's what I was hoping to hear. And I would have to say, with you and your team there, especially Thomas, definitely appreciate the partnership we've had with you over the past few months, and looking forward to continue diving into some of the data geek natures that some of us have here on the committee. So appreciate your work on this.
I was just going to add to that too. I was just going to add to that too. I think one of the biggest positive outliers I've seen in looking at the data was a lot of the grad rate. The grad rate for CTE completers is amazingly blew my mind as a data geek. And I've spent 10 years in the field working. I built a learning management system, and so built a lot of data reporting tools. That is an amazing positive outlier. And that really has inspired us. And in our weekly meetings, we've been excited about what about attendance, especially attendance in high schools, which, there's a kind of a nebulous term educators have used about student engagement, because it really does appear that this CTE completion, that grad rate is the telltale sign of that is these CTE completers are highly engaged kids. And what other things can we look at that identify this? And then if we can find some of these other indicators, what schools are not only have incredibly high grad rates for CTE completers, but have, exceptional attendance rates and possibly looking at our National Student Clearinghouse data to see where students are possibly showing up, whether in the state of California or across the country, in post-secondary education institutions. And it was nice to hear some of the presentations earlier, because people are going to be showing up in community colleges or technical institutions doing 2-year programs, and that I think can and could be exciting. And as Pete mentioned earlier, we're jumping down the rabbit hole on attendance, and I'm excited to do so.
Great, definitely appreciate it. Shani. I'm missing your audio here. All right, we'll give you a minute to check that. Any other? There we go. We got you, Shani. Yep.
Okay. I apologize. Having some Zoom problems. Okay. I just wanted to add really quickly a point that was made earlier about looking at the data to see if, particularly for the grants, the grantees, whether they're reducing outcomes and impact. I just wanted to add as a reminder that one of the things that we're required to do for K-12 Strong Workforce is look at outcomes and performance of the grantees prior to funding the next round. So it's an ongoing requirement. I think our challenge has been really accessing the data that will allow us to do that, but we're making progress, right, to obtain that data. And, of course, COVID has thrown everyone for a loop. But we continue to move that in that direction and really focus on outcomes from the grantees. And that's what we're really very interested in doing. And then, of course, as we can, as we sort of figure out our data sharing sort of challenges, we can begin to get those data sets in a more timely manner to help inform in those funding rounds as well. So we hope to have that data for you next year. We're still continuing to get at that, and we'll bring that forward next year.
That's great. That's very helpful. Thank you for that. Are there any other comments from members? And seeing none, then are there any comments from the public?
Chair Rawlings, there is none at this time.
All right. With no public comment on item number 4, we will conclude the public comment period for item 4. And that moves us to item number 5 is general public comment. This is a chance for members of the public to speak to us on issues that were not included on the agenda and within our jurisdiction. So are there any public comments?
There is none at this time.
All right. So with no public comment for item 5, then I would just actually there is one point I'd like to make, and I think I would send this over to Director Callas for recognizing someone that's going to go on and feed the brains of our future staff here.
Thank you, Chair Rawlings. I just want to recognize Pam Castleman from the State Board staff. She's done an amazing job with us. I know I've only been with CWPJAC for a few months now, but I've worked with Pam on other projects and have known her since she actually interviewed here at CDE. So she's done an amazing job partnering with us and representing the State Board staff, and we wish her luck as she's moving on to a new role as a full professor at William Jessup University with our education students that are going to be enrolling at William Jessup. So I want to thank her for everything that she's done for us and the support she's provided and some of the Texas humor that she's provided us over the last few years. So thank you, Pam, for all of the work you've done.
I will definitely be missing those conversations with Pam, especially just prior to our meetings. Absolutely, your students are going to be so well rewarded having you be their full professor. So congratulations on that. And I recognize Member Rucker.
Well, I wanted to take my opportunity to add my kudos and support to Pam leaving us. Well, actually, I was going to say leaving me, but I decided not to make it all about me. But Pam has been an excellent support to me as a member of the board and as a member on this panel. Her background, her understanding, her depth of thoughtfulness in the conversations, the content, and the work that we do, and understanding the nuts and bolts of all of these projects has been just so helpful. And I appreciate her patience and the ability she has to take even the most difficult of conversations and the most difficult of agenda items that have to go under development and pull everyone together and collect all concerns and really work toward a solution and keep that focus right there. So I know that the department has a great way of finding talent and finding talented staff, but the department also has a great way of showing off their talented staff so that other people pick them up and they leave us. So I'm glad to see her moving on, and I'm glad to see that she's going to have an impact on contributing to the pipeline for the teacher workforce. So I'm hoping that the work that she does will carry over from this department and into that work as well and inform that future cohort of leaders and teachers who come into our workforce. So Pam, just thank you so much. I'm just so glad I got to know you, and I'm so proud of the work that you're going to carry on and continue.
Thank you. Patricia DeCoste.
Yes, thank you so much, Chair Rawlings. I also just want to echo the comments of Member Rucker, as well as Director Collis in acknowledging the contributions of Pam. She's been working at the SBE office since 2017. We hired her from the field. She worked at a county office, worked at a couple of districts, a classroom teacher, and I know that she brings a lot of wealth and experience background to her new position at Jessup University. She'll be starting in January, and she's been a great colleague and partner in all of this work, bringing so much of, her experience and background from the field and always, keeping us honest, so to speak, about, what it is that the field does need and thinking about the policy work through that lens. So I very much appreciate having had the opportunity to work with her for the last several years, and I wish her well. Thank you.
Vice Chair Sun.
Yeah, and I'm also just adding to everything else everyone has said about Pam, completely agree, and just around her hard work and her practical knowledge and all of that. And I just wanted to add, and all with a Texas accent in her Southern charm. And, she can be very honest and very, very direct with some of her comments, but when she does it in that accent, it doesn't sting so much. And so, Pam, thank you so much for all your work and your support of us on the State Board of Education and in this committee.
And Pam, before I turn it to you, I just want to say we're expecting, of course, that we're going to have you identify your very best students and send them out to us, right? So no pressure there, right? So Pam, the floor is yours.
I'm not turning my camera on because you guys would see my tears and my droopy mascara, but this has been my passion, and I'm so thankful for our Deputy Director DeCoste asked me to ride in the sidecar with her on this project and with CTE as it is so endearing to my heart. And one thing that I have learned is that I'll be working with Jessup on increasing the teacher pipeline through a grant for our teachers in Northern California. And we're already talking about the impact of CTE and our teacher pathways in our schools in Northern California. I've shared my interest in research is the marriage of academics and CTE and the transformation of secondary education. So I am beyond thrilled, and I am so humbled to have been given the privilege to work with you all and learn so much about our policy world. And from the depths of my heart, I am very humbled to be in your presence, and you are forever loved and beloved in my heart. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pam. It means a lot. So with that, are there any other comments and last minute comments from members of the committee? And seeing none, I would just note that we have our next meeting is scheduled for January 21st, 2022. That's a Friday. Currently scheduled for 9 a.m. Potential it could be a little later start time, but want to make sure that y'all planned on an earlier start time just in case. And we don't know all the logistics that are going to be involved in that, so stay tuned. And if there are no other comments, then we will adjourn at 12:19 p.m. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.